Chairman Mao, Jamie Howe, Ho Chi Minh, Asif Din, Václav Havel, Graham Saville, No Surrender, Percy Fender, Guerilla Cricket.
A very warm welcome indeed to this Guerilla Cricket Podcast. So this one's a special one because I have as my guest Daniel Newman from JDRF. Hello, Daniel. Very, very warm welcome to Guerilla Cricket.
Thank you. Hi, Tony. Thanks for having me on.
Great to have you with us. You may know, if you're a regular follower or listener of the show, that during these crazy lockdown times, we have been taking part and broadcasting the Dickwella Broad Owzat Trophy. And it's got to an incredibly exciting stage. We're through to the final. And I'm also, in the most modest way possible, delighted to say that my team, based on pure skill, obviously in a dice rolling game, are in the final on Sunday. It will be on Sunday. This Sunday, UK time at 1 p.m. And I will be playing Hendo's, Nigel Henderson's, fat lot of Use 11. And we've battled our way through various groups. But the reason we have been playing this and the reason that we have been asking for donations is that we are partnered through the tournament with JDRF, the charity focused on prevention, research, cure for type 1 diabetes. You have been very generous to donate money to us. We'd love more, and hopefully this little chat with Daniel will help to explain why that is the case. So, Daniel, as I say, welcome. Perhaps you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and your own journey in with type 1 diabetes.
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who has donated to JDRF already. We really do appreciate that. And just in terms of me and my life with type 1 diabetes, so I was diagnosed at the age of 10 years old in 1996, and I've been living with type 1 diabetes for nearly 24 years. During that time, I've seen a lot of changes when it comes to technology from when I was first diagnosed to where we are now, which is great. But personally, my journey with type 1 diabetes has been very up and down. I had a particularly difficult period during my teenage years, going into my early 20s. And when you're diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, you're almost going through the 5 stages of grief, and you're learning to reach that acceptance point. And those years for me was really about denial, and it took me a long time to accept my type 1 diabetes. And sometimes what people who aren't living with the condition might not understand is actually the mental, physical and emotional toll the condition has on you as an individual living with it. Your family and your friends around you. On paper, it's very simple. You eat, you give yourself an injection of insulin, and everything should work out fine. But in reality, it's completely different. There are so many things that can affect your blood sugar levels, and these are all things that you have to take into consideration. And each day with type 1 diabetes is different. You can do the same thing twice and get 2 completely different outcomes. Yeah. And just going back to my journey, so once I got through those difficult years, and I'm in a much better place now, but I have experienced the consequences of not properly looking after myself when it comes to living with type 1 diabetes. So I'm sure people might or may not be aware, but the condition does come with a number of complications as well if you aren't able to manage your blood sugar levels as best as you can. And so I am living with complications. So I was in 2013, I was diagnosed with chronic kidney disease. And in April 2018, I had a kidney transplant. It's very, very likely that was due to type 1 diabetes and a complication of that. and they also live with diabetic retinopathy as well. So with that, it's where there are blood vessels, abnormal blood vessels growing in the back of my eyes, and that can affect my sight and my vision. And I've had to have, and my course of treatment has been having to have laser surgery, and I had a bleed in one eye. So the treatment for that was actually having an operation to remove the bleed and remove the jelly from my eye. So type 1 diabetes is a very, very serious condition. And I know that because I've lived with it, and hopefully I've been able to explain shortly how my journey, I've been able to explain my journey with it, just to highlight the condition.
Emotionally and effectively, Daniel. Let's just put a little bit of context here, because I share it vicariously, as it were, due to my son being diagnosed with type 1. One of the things I remember most was the moment of diagnosis and just the trauma around that. As a parent, tell me a little bit about, without trying to drag you back to just the time when you diabetes, type 1 diabetes presented itself to you, and just how you felt at that point as a young'un, I guess.
So, sorry. So, as I said, I was 10 years old. I remember the day leading up to diagnosis. So my aunt took myself and my cousins to the cinema. Mm-hmm. I was really unwell. But it was during the summer, so I was drinking a lot. But because it was hot, no one thought anything of it, because it was hot and you just drink a lot. And so going back to after the cinema, I was unwell, went home, I was still unwell. My mum called the emergency doctor, who came round quite late in the night and said, you need to take him to accident and emergency now. Went to A&E, was there for hours, not really knowing what was going on, but understanding something wasn't quite right. And I remember the doctor saying to me, you've got diabetes. And I remember that moment, but I don't really remember I at that age, I didn't understand the significance of that moment, because I was only 10 years old. And you understand that being in hospitals, you're not well and something's wrong. But it was only the years afterwards, particularly going back into school. I was going into my last year of primary school and then moving to secondary school, and navigating those years. That's been really, that's when it hit me, and I was like, oh wow, this is big, this is major.
I understand that. Now that's just a little bit of context. I think in the UK as a whole, there's something like 4.5 million people have diabetes, but only 8% of those are type 1. And type 1, of course, is not lifestyle based. It's not something you get obviously when you're older. It just happens to you. There's no medical thing that will prompt it. Obviously, what actually happens is your pancreas doesn't work. It stops producing insulin, and that's stops your blood absorbing glucose, which is why when that gets out of balance, your whole life can go out of balance. But a lot of people don't necessarily actually understand that clear distinction between type 2 and type 1. So type 1 affects about 8% of all people with diabetes. That would make still in the UK about 370,000 odd, I think, if I'm right.
Yeah, about 370 to I think maybe up to 400,000. And like you quite rightly say, when it comes to type 1, because it's an autoimmune condition and your body attacks itself, there is nothing that you can do. And there is no known cure. That's what we're here for, JDRF. Mm-hmm. And the best form of treatment is managing your type 1 diabetes by giving yourself insulin. And for when I was first diagnosed, I was on 2 injections a day, and that was 4 injections a day. And now, because of as I mentioned at the start, technology, I'm very fortunate that I've got an insulin pump. So that's still giving myself insulin, but under a different regime. So yeah, and that's one of the things actually that hasn't changed over the years, is the misconception around type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes. I think now we're definitely talking about type 1 diabetes more. It's more prevalent now in the media and in conversations, but the misunderstanding between the two is still there.
Yeah, even amongst us, I say, we were chatting on before we started this interview. And, I was confessing that I'm not entirely sure all my colleagues appreciate the difference, but they will do after this. Tell us a little bit about the work of JDRF. I mean, clearly we understand very much the principles of funding research to look for prevention and cure, but tell us a little bit about how you go about doing that, and particularly what you do within that process, Daniel.
Okay, so within JDRF as an organisation in the UK, I actually work in the HR team. So whilst I'm not directly involved in our fundraising team or our research partnerships team or our communications team, I do play a part in terms of making sure that, along with my manager, I'll throw that in there, it's not just me, it's my manager as well, making sure that the organisation is functioning well. And where the actual work that we do, so we've got our community engagement team. So that team is out in the type 1 diabetes community, talking to people who live with type 1. If people living with type 1 have a question or any issues, then they can contact the community engagement team. That team's also engaging with healthcare professionals and making sure that type 1 is being spoken about. Well, it's being spoken about, but there's a voice there for people with type 1 diabetes. We've got our research communications and our research partnerships team. So our research communications team looks at all the research that is around type 1 diabetes, digests that information, and then spreads that information, the research findings, within the community to say, actually, this is what's going on. We've got our research partnerships team who look at different ways of more money coming into funding type 1 diabetes research and actually looking at organisations working together. We've got, again, our fundraising team who put on events, including discovery days. So those events are about the information days where if you're newly diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, if you've been living with type 1 diabetes for 20 years, 30 years, you can come along to those events, learn more about type 1 diabetes. And it's almost like a peer-to-peer like support event in a way. So you get to meet others living with type 1. And they're great events. Because particularly for me, because I work in HR, when I get to go to those events and actually speak to people in the community who our work directly supports and helps, it's really rewarding because I don't always get to have those conversations. So those events are great, and everything that we do is focused around funding research to find a cure for
I can tell you, Daniel, as a parent, that I remember those community events and that support network when you're the parent of a child recently diagnosed, to have a network of people who understand that, even planning things like sleepovers, basic things. It's very hard to go to a parent of a child who doesn't have diabetes, have your son, in my case, stay over, and you can't expect that person to get up at midnight and 3 o'clock in the morning and check the levels of their child and make sure an injection is administered. That's asking an awful lot of another parent. So just little practical things like that, I recall very much the value. I remember we went on a couple of like camps and day events and things like that. And it's not that you want specifically to just spend your time with no one but people with diabetes, but to know that you have that network of people who are always there to help you going through the same thing, that mattered to me as much as a parent as it did, I think, for my son, who obviously was also making a huge amount of friends through it. But for parents, I recall that was just invaluable.
it's nice when people just get it, and you can just talk about the frustrations of life that comes with a type 1 diabetes diagnosis, because we do experience those frustrations. Whether you're the person with type 1 or, in your case, a parent of a child with type 1, you do experience those frustrations and all these different emotions going on any given day.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Now, a lot of people may not know, actually, that there are a few cricketers who have been type 1. For the top of the list might surprise a few people, Wasim Akram. Although he actually was diagnosed when he was 30, which is, I think, if I'm right, Daniel, that's comparatively late. Most type 1 diabetes tends to be discovered in the first sort of between the ages of sort of 5 and 15. Am I right?
So, yes, you are. In terms of people with type 1 diabetes tend to be diagnosed at a younger age, but you can be diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at any age. So yeah.
Well, so it was with Wasim Akram, I think Craig Cumming, Craig McMillan, Dirk Wellham. Have you worked with, Daniel, during your work with JDRF, have you worked with with any famous sports folk?
So I know that in terms of the list that you put together, we have indirectly worked with Wasim Akram. Sorry, he attended Sir Ian Botham's 60th birthday party, which was in aid of JDRF.
Well, because Ian Botham's daughter Becky is type 1, isn't she?
She's got type 1, yes. And I've met her as well, and she's coming to the office. And
fantastic!
Really, really nice woman. And so in that instance, yes, we've worked with Wasim Akram because he attended Ian Botham's birthday party. But with the others, we haven't worked with any of those, but we'd love to. In terms of famous sports people, particularly within the type 1 diabetes community, there's somebody who I've worked with is Chris Bright. Mm-hmm. So he's an international futsal player for Wales, and he started off at semi-professional football and has worked his way up to representing Wales at the international futsal level. And I spoke to him once. I interviewed him, and it was a really inspiring journey to hear how the challenges that he overcame, even with type 1, to get to the level where he is at now, and how actually he's wanting to give back to the community. And he set up something called the Diabetes Football Community. So, I
mean, one of the things I've noticed is, what's the buzzword these days is all about content, isn't it? But that's to call it resources rather than content. You do provide a lot of help in the form of videos and written stuff that really helps people people like my son in terms of playing sport and managing playing sport. I remember football trips and cricket matches where if you're having to manage your blood glucose levels as a 10-year-old or 11-year-old, that again takes an awful lot of doing. Gary Mabbott, you might remember Gary Mabbott.
Yes,
he was a tremendous support. You probably met him during the course because I think he's done a lot of work for JDRF. He was tremendously supportive to my lad and sent him a couple of notes and encouraged him along and stuff. Always appreciative of that.
Yeah, I remember Gary Mabbott from my diagnosis story. So as we discussed before we started, I'm an Arsenal fan. So 10-year-old me, when I was diagnosed, everyone was telling me, oh, Gary Mabbott's got type 1. He's got type 1. And I didn't understand what the connection with type 1. I just saw Arsenal Tottenham. And for any listeners, so if any listeners, Arsenal and Tottenham are rivals. So there were people telling me, this player from your rivals has got something like you. That's great. And 10-year-old me couldn't quite understand. Could just this is Arsenal, Tottenham. So that's something that kind of sticks out from my memory. And it's just come to my mind. We've also worked with Novo Nordisk and their
Absolutely.
diabetes cycling team. In particular, there's a cyclist the name which comes to mind is Sam Brand, and he's helped us out with a lot of events as well, and with Novo Nordisk and the diabetes cycling team. Basically, everyone on that cycling team has type 1 diabetes, and
Wow.
it's the first professional cycling team which has all members are living with type 1 diabetes. And I think that's inspirational to the diabetes community as a whole.
That is magnificently inspirational. Now, Daniel, you, I was thinking how professional you've been. It's like you've done this before, and then I realise you have. So you run your own. You've got your own podcast, which I think is called Talking Type 1. Am I right?
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that and some of the guests you've had on.
So yes, I've kind of done this before. So I've got the Talking Type 1 podcast, and basically, as I mentioned, I've been living with type 1 diabetes for a number of years, and I've become more active in the diabetes community over the past two years. And I can express myself better verbally. And I always wanted to give back because I feel that the kind of journey that I've been on, the experience that I've had living with type 1 diabetes, I can give back, but also not just from my experience, but share other people's stories and journeys as well, because there were many times when I was living with type 1 where I felt quite lonely, and it would have been nice to know that other people are going through what I'm going through. And so that was kind of the why to starting the podcast was, give back to the community, share other people's stories. And I think that I work at JDRF. I also do my own stuff in the diabetes community, and I have access to different voices and different stories, and really trying to merge my two worlds together. And some of the guests that I've had on, so I mentioned I've had Chris Bright on, I've had a guy called Tom Allison, who's a diabetes online health coach, and I spoke to him about diabetes, exercising with type 1 diabetes. I had another guest, Paul Pritchard, who's been living with type 1 diabetes for 47 years. I've spoken to parents of children living with type 1 diabetes. Some who, recently his son was diagnosed at 11 months old. But what I really want to do in the podcast is share all these different stories and all these different experiences to help at least one person out there. So that's the real motivation, is that there's so many stories out there, so many areas of expertise that, yes, I can tap into, share that with somebody else who might benefit from it. So I really like the whole podcast format, and just having that one-on-one conversation and an interview, because everyone's stories, journeys, so unique, and I've learned something from every single interview that I've done, and it's been very rewarding for me and very just insightful.
I guess we can find that on Podbean, iTunes, Spotify, and all usual podcast providers, can we?
Yes, yeah. just search for the Talking Type 1, the One to Digit podcast, and all your favorite podcast that.
I'd have listened to a couple. So that's there. So Daniel, it's been interesting and a delight to chat to you. As I said, our final of the Dickwella Broad Owzat Trophy, the crunch game. It's all come to this. Hendo and his fat lads, if we can drag them away from the Sunday lunchtime buffet, and my making a spectacle team, if they can stumble and bumble their way as far as Trent Bridge, which is the imaginary stadium we've been playing our lockdown tournament in, just to make it easy for us, so we don't have to keep putting in bits of commentary as we literally make it up as we go along, frankly. But that takes place at 1 p.m. this Sunday. Do please listen and join us. Tweet, Facebook, We're on YouTube. We're everywhere. Our Just Giving page, it will appear on a caption if the bear does his job right after at the end of this. But it's if you Google Just Giving Dickwella Broad, then you will find that page. It's also all over our social media. I'm going to leave the last word with Daniel. Daniel, one final message for our viewers, fans, listeners, and friends from you to them. What would you like to say to them?
I'd like to say, firstly, enjoy the final. I'm sure it will be a good final. And secondly, if you are able to support JDRF, then please do, because the work that we do is invaluable. I've not touched on it, but actually me starting to work at JDRF came at a real crunch time in my life. And when I said that I went through those struggles during my teenage years up until my 20s, it was starting to work at JDRF that made a huge change and difference to my life. And I can just really sing the praises of the work that we do. And I'm just one person, but there are so many other people out there who are living with type 1 who have been helped by the work of JDRF. So if you are able to help, then please do, because you're not only helping people now, but you'll be helping people in the future as well. And it's one step closer to us finding the cure for type 1 diabetes.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you for your work. And thank you for being our guest today. We will see you on Sunday at 1 p.m. We're looking forward to that. Once again, Daniel, thank you so much. And we will see you soon.
Guerilla Cricket.